Councilmember Clark?
Here.
Dearness? Absent. Johnson?
Here.
Waite?
Here.
Mayor Toussaint? Absent.
Okay. And Daniel, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Right hand over the heart.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Lisa, could you please announce the criteria for public comment?
At this time, please direct comments to the City Council regarding consent calendar items or matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the Council. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes.
Okay, the first speaker slip that I have is Tim Mahoney. State your name, where you're from, and what you're going to speak about.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and audience. Tim Mahoney, I'm with Southern California Gas Company, and we are the local public utility for new natural gas. And so, PG&E brings you the lighting, but we're the ones that bring in the natural gas for this. So, the residents of Solvang are my customers. So tonight, it's kind of cold outside. People are going to go home. They're going to walk over to a wall, flip that switch on. The warm air comes out. Chances are that warm air is heated by natural gas. People are going to cook a dinner tonight, walk into the kitchen, turn on that stove, and that blue flame lights up. That's natural gas. Wake up tomorrow morning, take a hot shower. Good chance that that hot water was made possible by Southern California Gas Company bringing that to your home. So that's who we are in your neighborhood and in the valley here. So I just wanted to kind of do a couple of things tonight, and perhaps you can share this experience. I've had lots of folks come up to me because of the closure of Diablo Canyon, other PG&E issues, and they say, you know, is the gas company doing okay? What are we still going to get the heat and the hot water and the cooking? So I wanted to come to Solvang tonight and assure you that yes, we're doing fine. Customers, no customer impacts at this level here. Gas is still flowing, and kind of just put a little community angst to bed because I've had some folks ask me that. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is kind of a new direction where we're going in 2019. And there's 3 sources of what we're calling renewable natural gas. And this is natural gas, indigenous renewable gas that is produced at landfills, dumps, wastewater treatment plants, a sewer plant, and not so much in this area, but of course in the Central Valley of California, which is in our service territory. There's a lot of dairy and agricultures that produce methane. In 2019, gas company is going to go out there. We're going to capture that methane, which is now escaping into the atmosphere and causing greenhouse gases. We're going to capture that at those 3 sources, treat it, odorize it for safety, of course, and then put that into the pipeline. The ultimate goal is to be able to use that in the heavy-duty trucking market. So 18-wheelers, we hope to be able to use that as a natural gas to power 18-wheelers. We plan to also build a commercial trucking fueling station at our Santa Maria base, which is right by the Santa Maria airport. So kind of some new developments which I wanted to share. And lastly, is a term about balanced energy. There is a movement in the kind of California, if you will, to do a lot of electrification. And I'm an electric customer, like you guys are. I want to be an electric customer. But I don't want my heating, my hot water, and my space heating in the house done with electricity because it's just too expensive. So please keep that in mind when people are talking about electrification and things of that nature. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Next speaker I have up is Carolyn, and I can't pronounce your last name, Caroline.
Thank you. My last name is Abate.
Abate,
Caroline Abate.
You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Members of the Solvang City Council, thank you for allowing me to speak with you. I understand this is not the content of typical public comment. Thank you for being willing to listen and consider this perspective. The great economy in our country is the result of many thoughtful decisions made by President Trump. Typical of Republican fiscal policy, President Trump has cut taxes and decreased regulations on businesses. These actions have created almost 4 million new jobs. Last month alone, our economy added 304,000 new jobs. More people are employed now than at any other time in our nation's history, 157 million people. The national unemployment rate, including the unemployment rate for African Americans and Hispanics, have reached historic lows. President Trump has also replaced the harmful and unfair North American Free Trade Agreement with the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which protects American workers and their jobs while still being fair to the interests of Mexico. President Trump is also successfully undertaking the extremely consequential task of renegotiating a protective trade policy with China. Correcting these horrible international trade deals will have a profound impact on securing America's long-term economic future. How is all of this relevant to the city of Solvang? In good economic times with low unemployment, people are more likely to have a greater amount of expendable income, which increases the chance of them taking a vacation. This is especially important for tourist destination cities like the city of Solvang. As more visitors come to Solvang, more tax revenue is generated in the transient occupancy tax for hotel rooms. Small businesses and restaurants benefit from the increase in customers and may decide to hire more staff, creating jobs for the local economy. At recent city council meetings, statistics were given that showed increases in tourism as well as in the transient occupancy tax. And that is how President Trump has helped the city of Solvang. President Trump and his administration deserve tremendous credit for their tireless dedication and commitment to the monumental task of creating a strong, stable, and durable national economy for a country as huge, complex, and diverse as that of our beloved United States. Please think carefully about giving President Trump the credit he deserves. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you, and may each person listening have a good evening.
Thank you. Charles Werner.
Good evening, City Council, or 3/5 of it, I guess. I wanted to congratulate you, although perhaps it's a bit premature because I don't think you've officially acted on this yet, but I want to congratulate you on choosing David Gassaway as our new city manager. I reviewed his credentials and they're superb. His academic credentials, his work history, and his references were all superb. So thank you for a great job. If this is any indication of the leadership we're going to have from our new city government, bravo. I think the city of Solvang is in very good hands. And I also want to thank Rick Hayden, who I've had the opportunity to work with as the interim city manager. And I just hope David Gassaway is as good as you, Rick. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tracy Farhad.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council members, members of the audience. Tracy Farhad, Executive Director of the Solvang Conference and Visitors Bureau, for your tourism update tonight. Wanted to let you know we aired for 2 hours on KLAA. That's actually the Angels Stadium radio station on Saturday, right here from Solvang. 2-hour show with the Southern California restaurant guy, so SoCal restaurant guy, featuring our upcoming Taste of Solvang and a lot of the great food and wine purveyors and chefs and institutions here. I want to thank the Lansby for helping to host that, as well as Lucas Llewellyn and Inga Borgs, including the Shumash, and as well as Hitching Post Wines for coming forward. It was pretty exciting to have that being aired leading up to one of the Angels' first games. So that was a good exposure for us. I wanted to tell you about Taste of Solvang coming up. We're just almost 3 weeks away. It's March 15th through the 17th. And of course, you're all invited to attend. This year, it is the 27th year hard to believe. We have the Sip and Savor event that's going to be at the Hotel Cork this year. It's going to be pretty exciting. We're going to follow it with an after party from 9 to 11, and that's there as well. We have a culinary tasting trail the next day on Saturday all day, and it's going to include the first ever sidewalk sale with the Chamber of Commerce, so that will be a fun thing, as well as free entry to the museums on that culinary tasting trail. The wine and beer walk goes for 2 days for a passport event, and we also have a Sunday brunch and some winemaker dinners. So we hope everyone will come out, and I want to thank our key sponsors, the City of Chorus, Visit the San Ynez Valley, and our number one sponsor is the Shumesh Casino Resort. So you can get tickets, solvangusa.com, Taste of Solvang. So we're excited about having the Highway 154 open soon. We've got all our fingers crossed for that, even though it's supposed to rain next week. But it would be really nice to have that open in time for the Taste of Solvang. But ticket sales have been going very well, even with the weather challenges. So we hope it holds out for us. It's rain or shine. We'll see you there. Thank you.
Sir, I thought I told you to lock that door. We have 4. Next up is Tracy Beard.
Hello, Tracy Beard with the Solvang Chamber of Commerce. We wanted to let you know that tomorrow we're having an educational class, and it is a retail experience to see what does retail look like in the future for Solvang. And we've invited everyone to come, so we just wanted to come here today and let you know what we're doing tomorrow and bring some flyers and pass them out. And we hope to see you sometime tomorrow from 3 to 6. And our experience is 3 to 5 and a little reception afterwards.
Thank you, Tracy.
Oh, it's at the Hotel Cork tomorrow, right in town on Ellisall. Thank you.
3 o'clock. Thank you, Tracy. Next up is Mitch Williams.
Thank you, Robert. My name is Mitch Williams. I'm a local general building contractor. I don't live in the city of Solvang, but I have some properties in Solvang. I don't see the agenda topic that I intended to speak on tonight on the calendar. So rather than go off on that, I'll wait for the appropriate time, but want to congratulate all of you for being elected, and happy to be here to see our city leaders at work. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Justin Rodriguez.
Hi, my name is Justin Rodriguez. I'm a city resident of Solvang, and then I just wanted to put some, say some notes for. I've heard that they were trying to combine the Planning Commission with the ARB.
BAR.
BAR, yeah, Board of Architectural Review. Anyway, I think that streamlining the government is a good idea. I think it's a wise direction for the council to consider. I think it's a good idea to choose qualified personnel to fill these roles. People that have experience maybe in construction or development themselves, knowing what hurdles they have to face going through different cities. I myself being an asphalt contractor, I've had this firsthand the experience of seeing developers and people trying to remodel their homes, whatever, have great struggles dealing with cities, going back, plan checks, and going through a round robin of expenditures. And I think if we streamline the process to make it easier for developers and other people to invest their money, one, development could happen a little bit faster and generate tax revenues for the city, so it's a win-win for the city, but also not wasting other people's money and time for coming in here and scaring them away. And I've talked to many different local businesses, and they've had issues sometimes trying to repaint the outside or whatever, just based on architectural review board and different struggles. They have to go back and forth with the city, and it becomes a challenge for them to want to update or invest in their businesses. So I think making things easier for our local businesses and making things easier for people to come into the town is a good idea. And not only that, the faster you can build businesses out or let them expand or whatever to grow their businesses, the more tax revenue the city can generate. So I think it's a good idea. And yeah, I think that's a wise decision. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Next up, Charles C.J. Jackson. Resident of Solvang, yes, no, sort of.
I'm not one that lacks specificity. I am a resident of wonderful non-municipal Solvang, and I am involved with a business that is distinctly and squarely in the city of Solvang, the Owl Sound Ranch. Mayor Pro Tem, council members, my name is C.J. Jackson, and I'm here for a different reason altogether. In the waning days of 2008, I had the privilege of serving as the 3rd District Planning Commissioner for the County of Santa Barbara. One of the issues that was central to discussion was the regional housing needs assessment. And the political waves being what they were, the intensity with which those numbers were addressed wavered with the political winds. However, you are not so fortunate at this time. You are in the middle of the 2014 to 2022 period. At present, the state has outlined that the County of Santa Barbara is 11,030 units shy of its countywide target. And the cities of Santa Barbara and Carpinteria have been wrestling with these. The other 7 municipalities in the County of Santa Barbara have not fulfilled those assessment needs. I don't know where your state is on this process, but it's coming. In the preceding years, before several of you took your seats, the issue of the size and scope of housing in the city of Solvang was an issue that generated, well, shall we say, a little bit of passion. I expect fully that that will be a consideration going forward. However, the problem with the current environment is that the state is seeing a 2 million unit shortfall statewide and looking to have 180,000 units per year. What may be changing, and why I brought my term up on the Planning Commission, is I am one who advocates and believes that a community and the members of that community should establish what it's going to look like. I believe that what we are seeing in certain municipalities is an undue amount of pressure being placed by the state to force and constrain cities in their ability to control and manage what their cities will look like. And I am here to tell you that I believe you have an engaged population that will want to take up that issue fully and to be prepared for it. It is complex, it is confusing, but I am concerned with a governor who has been somewhat belligerent in his tone about the enforcement of this, that we may have a different environment. So I encourage you, when you plan the discussion of this item, to do so with sufficient planning for a public voice on it, because you will find when people conclude where that may go, you'll need to hear from them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. That concludes the public speaker portion. I have no more slips. Mr. Hayden, can we have the city manager's report?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Clark. Your next city council meeting actually will be a special council meeting, and it'll be on the 28th, this Thursday, at 5:30. It's a special time. That will be a meeting for appointments to the Planning Commission and the Board of Architectural Review. As of today, we have 10 applications for the Planning Commission. We have 8 applications for the Board of Architectural Review. We are going to be accepting applications up through tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Applications and the information of how to apply is on the city's website for anybody interested. Your next regularly scheduled city council meeting is 2 weeks from today, which will be March the 11th. We have a couple of items on there. We have a consent item for the investment policies annual review. We also have a first reading of the story polls and noticing of the zoning ordinance that went to the Planning Commission about a month and a half ago. And then we also will be having a discussion on the 24-hour business operation ordinance. That was brought to the City Council a little bit over a month ago. It went back to the Planning Commission, and now we'll be coming back to the city council with a discussion item. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Rick. Moving on to council comments and requests. Anybody like to start?
Certainly. I want to just announce to the public that I had the pleasure of attending the 2018 annual award ceremony out at Vandenberg Air Force Base with Mayor Pro Tem Clark. I was very impressed with the number of sponsors from Solvang and donors from Solvang from our own businesses. And I would like to see more publicity regarding this event, possibly next year. Very proud of our servicemen and women who served our country so loyally and so valuably, and it was definitely a night to remember. Then I have a second comment, and that has to do with I want to appreciate a communication that I received from a member of the public regarding our emergency systems and our emergency activation systems. And if I could have the city or Lisa address that particular communication, because I didn't want that to go unmentioned.
Councilmember Waite, the communication, I believe, was in regards to the emergency operations plan and our city's communications and the fact that cell phones are not very efficient in points of times of disasters. I just wanted to mention that our emergency response plan and management plan will be updated this coming year, this year, 2019, and that the City of Solvang has a satellite phone that we use to communicate with the Office of Emergency Services for the county, as well as internally we update our radios every few years to make sure that they're usable for staff to speak during coordination efforts of a disaster, as well as there is a very broad ham operators unit in the area that also runs in cooperation with the Office of Emergency Management for the county.
Chris?
Thank you. First, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. It's always great to see people in the audience. The more that we have, I think, the stronger the community is and the better we are as a council in terms of recognizing your voices and your opinions. I want to thank Justin Rodriguez for his comments. I agree completely with what you just said regarding the consolidation of the Planning Commission and the BAR. And I appreciate C.J. Jackson's comments on the need for affordable housing in our community and the fact that we've got to address this head on. I haven't heard much from the previous council over the last 2 years about how they were going to address that shortage. I'd like to find out more. I guess Holly would be the person to address that, is that right? Do we need to put that on the agenda for future reference, or for future discussion, I should say?
We can do an update of our arena numbers and our housing element for the city council at a future agenda if you'd like. Or, we have Ms. Owen here right now that she might be able to address that question directly.
Great.
Good evening. I just wanted to remind you too that the annual update is coming up. The progress report that we are required to file with the state. So that would be a perfect time to enter into that longer range discussion as to what our needs may be, what kind of zoning changes we may be looking at in the future to accommodate those as yet unknown numbers. So recall that the numbers are received through the state, through the county, and then eventually to us, and hopefully we will be prepared at that time when we receive them.
So they're dictated to us.
Yes, they are dictated to us. Now, what that means, however, that you need to remember that it's not a mandate to build. It is a requirement to zone for that particular number. So that's what the exercise is about in summary.
Well, I'd love to hear more from C.J. Jackson's perspective, given his previous background and expertise in terms of how do we go about building those units, especially, we may not need to build them all at one time, clearly.
We won't need to actually build any of them. We need to zone for them. We need to allow for that to happen, should the market encourage that. So that's part of the challenge.
Is it the market that dictates this or the state? I'm getting confused.
Well, if I can explain a little bit, generally the housing law just requires the city to remove barriers and zone the property so that the market can adjust and bring in the necessary units. SB 166 that just recently got passed put a further burden on cities in that if we're going to downzone a parcel that is residentially zoned, we have to look for opportunities to meet that RENA number on other parcels. So there may be some shifting of the way parcels are zoned, but ultimately the responsibility for building the units falls to the private sector. It's not something the city is obligated to do.
So we're not obligated to do it, but we have to make it possible for them to do it.
That's correct.
Exactly.
Which brings me to Mitch Williams' comment.
Excuse me.
Unfortunately, this has been a long-running problem for our community. I know Mitch has been trying hard to build affordable housing in our community. I would love to hear from him. I don't know when it's appropriate, if we had the time, but I'd like to see him speak for 5 or 10 minutes to explain some of the challenges that he's had in trying to get his project off the ground. Apparently, the city has not been as helpful to that project, and I'd like to know more about what we can do to make that work. And if not, what are we going to do with respect to affordable housing?
It's something we can put on the agenda for our next meeting, but if Mitch would like to come up and talk about it, we can make an exception if we vote on it.
Can you speak to that for 5 minutes? Sure. Great.
We need to approve that first. What's that?
This is not on the agenda. We can't do that unless there's need to take immediate action and that it came to the council's attention after the agenda was posted. You could add it to the agenda in those circumstances.
Can we add it to a future agenda?
Council member, Mayor Pro Tem, my recommendation is that city staff sit down with Mr. Williams and address some of his concerns to see if this is an item that would be within the purview of the city council. Normally you have items that are direction items of staff that you hear rather than a lot of presentations. So be quite frank, you know, if you start allowing individuals to come up and make presentations, where do you stop it? And so if this is an item that we might be able to address at the staff level, I'm a little bit familiar with the project. I would be glad to sit down with Mr. Williams and discuss it.
Okay. And as well, you can, at the next meeting during public comment, we could address that as well, but
Yes.
we'd like to get some more involvement in that, so it would take more than 3 minutes. So if we could do that, that's fine.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a long-standing problem, and I don't know that the staff can resolve this. I know they've tried for 2 years. I think the council needs to be more informed about this particular project and how we can streamline it, if we can, and get this thing done. It's been in the works for years. And I think this goes to the heart of what Justin was saying and what C.J. Jackson had been saying. Anyway, I look forward to that conversation.
Okay.
And we can provide an update of what the issues were with the project. But the project, my understanding of the current status of it is there was no final application ever submitted for the project. So it's a little difficult for the council to provide direction on a project that has not come in, you know, fully baked, so to speak. It's my understanding there was a housing element or housing factors involved in the proposed project, but it never got past that point. So we're a little bit constrained at the staff level from determining what the project would ultimately be. We can certainly address some of the concerns that were raised on there, but until such time as there's a policy decision for the council to make with respect to the project, it's a little difficult for staff to anticipate what should be prepared. If it's an open-ended discussion, that may be something that's more appropriate to outside a council meeting with a council member and Mr. Williams, or 2 council members and Mr. Williams, to try to determine what needs to be done. But as far as in the absence of a policy decision for the council to make at this point, it's a little difficult for us to understand what would need to be put on the agenda.
I would like to set that up now if we can, with, say, 2 council members and Mr. Williams to go forward on that.
That would be appropriate. You could certainly do that.
Okay, let's do that. Okay.
Do we have an idea as to who the council members are? I'm sure Mr. DeGiornis would like to be one of them. And
certainly, because I do work on the Economic Development Committee. I'd like to participate in that.
Mayor, would you want to?
Well, in full transparency and disclosure, I've already spoken with Mr. Williams regarding this. So in order to avoid any type of Brown Act violation or what do you call it, subsequent meetings, serial meetings, I am not quite sure how to handle this, but I do know we have a brand-new council. We'll be having new administration. Maybe we should all just sit back and take a fresh look at this, and you would be the one to direct how this should happen.
And in the absence of knowing which council members have spoken with Mr. Williams, I wouldn't want to give you any direction as to who the two council members are. But since you have already, and Councilmember Jernis has expressed an interest in doing that, that's just the two of you. And if it were just limited to the two of you, that would be one thing. If Mayor Toussaint has spoken, then there may be some serial meetings issues.
I can speak for myself.
I thought this was going to be conducted in a public way to avoid Brown Act problems.
Well, we can certainly put something on the agenda for the entire council. What I was recommending is that two council members meet outside a council meeting to meet with Mr. Williams to discuss what the issues are, so you would have that opportunity to understand what the roadblocks were, rather than putting it on an agenda item where staff doesn't have any policy decision to present. I can certainly sit down with you and let you know as well staff's perspective.
Sure.
Ms. Owen could certainly provide that perspective as well. Mr. Williams could provide that perspective as well. But to put it on a council agenda, we typically bring council agenda items where there's a decision point for council to make based on a policy decision. And in the absence of a project, the council would be presupposing a decision point on a project that has not even yet been applied for formally. So it's kind of putting the cart before the horse to have that council-wide discussion on the project. We're more than happy as staff members, though, to sit down with you and discuss what the history has been.
Well, that part I understood, but why do we need two members to speak to him?
You don't need to. I'm just saying to have it at a level where you don't need to have a Brown Act meeting for it. You could just sit down with Mr. Williams yourself as one council member, and there wouldn't be a Brown Act issue. Does that make sense?
Report it back to the committee or to the council.
You could certainly do that. Sure.
Dave, I think what Chris wants to do is put it back on the agenda, the act of combining the BAR and the Planning Commission, and then the individuals can give their public comment on that. So if it's on the agenda, then anyone can come up and speak on it for or against again, right?
Okay. I thought we were talking about Mr. Williams' project.
No, we're not talking about Mr. Williams' project.
I'm talking about Mr. Williams' project.
I think. Oh, you're specifically talking about his project, because I think it has to do with combining the two. I think that's what
it does relate to it, but I'm more in line with what he was suggesting here. I don't know why we need two members to talk to him. It sounds to me like I could just talk to him.
You don't. You're perfectly free to speak with Mr. Williams at any time about the project.
And there's no Brown Act or serial Brown Act problems, right?
Not unless you speak with two other council members about it.
About what I talked to him about.
Correct.
Right. I'm just making this publicly clear so that everybody knows what I want to do. Secondly, what I'd like to do is get this out on the table for the council to understand where that hang-up has been, because I know he's had problems in the past between the BAR and the Planning Commission. It seems like he was going round and around, and I got this from the meetings last year. So I'd like to see that resolved, and then that addresses some of the issues that Justin and C.J. Jackson were talking about tonight.
And when Mr. Williams submits a project and it goes through the environmental review process and the other processes that a
now
project...
Remember, the question was, why does it have to go through the environmental review if he doesn't have the okay to go forward?
Well, all projects that are brought to the city have to go through CEQA review. It's a requirement of law.
Doesn't that happen after he gets certain approvals?
No.
So he needs to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get that done before he can move forward.
I can't presuppose what type of environmental review he would need because he hasn't brought forth an application yet. If he brought forth an application for a single-family residence on the property, the level of environmental review would be very low. If he brought forth a 65-unit commercial establishment, it would require significantly greater environmental review. We can't, as staff, prejudge or pre-guess what level of environmental review will be necessary until there's actually a project application with a project scope, and that has not happened to date.
Boy, I would love for Mitch to talk about this in front of our council. But it seems like the best way to approach this, I guess, is just one-on-one and then report back somehow.
Okay.
Is that what I'm hearing from the staff? Yes. Why didn't you just say that? All right. Thank you.
Okay. Any comments, Daniel? That was a good left turn. I would like to add, my only comment is that I sat at the table with Karen on Friday night, and there was about 500 people there at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and they were giving out awards to heroes, which was really kind of weird because I was sitting around 500 heroes. And so they kind of picked the heroes of the heroes. And it was actually, they were all in civilian clothes, and it was a theme was superheroes. And we had the pleasure of sitting next to the commander of the base, Major General Stephen Whiting, who is heads the missile command, another Brigadier General, Chief Jennings, and then the guest speaker and the keynote speaker, this was a Master Sergeant Scotty Guerin, who at 3,000 feet was hit by another parachutist and fell 3,000 feet at over 100 miles an hour and landed on the ground and survived on his 90th jump and got up to jump again after 18 months in the hospital. And it was extremely, extremely inspirational. And it just, I feel so fortunate that I'm sitting here and I got to do something like that and be around people like that. So that's my only comments. It was a really special event, and I would like to get Solvang more involved in that and in sponsorships and whatnot. And they seem to be real pleased. It's funny that they were introducing us too, which was really, really humbling, because it was really, really neat. And it was really also neat seeing them all in civilian clothes, because you're talking to the guy that's the Major General, and he's wearing a shirt that says Sidekick. And I think his wife had a different shirt on. So that's the only comments that I have. Getting on to correspondence, any council people, can any council members have any comments on correspondence received? You made a comment, you have yours, so we're there, good there. Anybody else? Daniel? No? Okay. Now, Lisa, would you please read the title for the consent calendar, please? Double, please.
The consent agenda is designed for routine administrative city matters and is approved by roll call vote with one motion. These items are discussed only on request by council members. Members of the public were afforded an opportunity to speak on consent agenda items during the public communications portion of this agenda.
Am I going to read them? Okay. All right. You've seen them. Do any council members have any items they would like to pull off at this time?
Yes. I'd like to pull item D, please.
And item D is the renewal of the city auditor contract to approve and authorize the mayor to execute the amendments, which will extend to the year covering 2018-19 at an annual cost of $29,805. You want to pull that off?
I'd like to pull it off and put it out to bid, yes.
Okay.
I'd like to pull F for a little more discussion and input, because it's a significant change in an event.
And F is the request for changes to the Santa Barbara Wine Country Half Marathon special event, that the council approve the proposed changes to the event, thereby allowing the race to start and finish in Solvang. So we've got a motion to pull D. Want to take them separately? If we'd like to, does anyone want to make a motion to pull D off the consent agenda?
Sure, I make a motion to pull D off the consent agenda.
I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. D is pulled. I'll make a motion to pull F off the consent agenda.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor, say aye.
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 So we have D and F off the consent agendas. Having heard the motions, any further council discussion on those? Well, I already went ahead of you, Lisa, I'm sorry. And moving on to regular business items, Lisa, would you please read the title for the agenda item number 6?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, we need to approve the consent agenda without DNF on there.
My apologies,
and then
you're
if
right.
you wish to consider DNF at this point, you would do so immediately following the approval of the consent agenda. You certainly could do that.
Okay, so at this point, we will take a vote, Lisa, if you would, on the consent agenda minus D and F.
We'll need a motion to approve the consent in the second.
Make a motion.
I motion to approve the consent agenda, removing item D and F for further discussion.
And I will second that.
Lisa, take a roll call, please.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Waite?
Yes.
Dearness? Yes. Clark?
Yes. Did you just look at my name tag?
Maybe.
So that we're in that item D.
So we want to discuss it now. Yeah, I just feel that it would be important to, I understand that it's the last year that they can do it. I just feel with the new council, with the new city manager, that it'd be prudent for us to be transparent and to find a new auditor to make sure that we know exactly what's going on financially in the city. And it never hurts to just have a fresh look at it. So that's my opinion.
And are we going to vote on that then?
Yeah, we can vote on it, right?
Yeah, there were two basic paths. One is to go ahead and approve the item as presented, or give staff alternate direction, which, if I understand, would be to request put out an RFP for proposals for auditing services.
Okay. So somebody want to make a motion to put?
I motion to put it out to put out the renewal or finding of a new city auditor and put out an RFP.
Anybody second?
I'll second that.
Please take a roll call, please.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Dearness?
Yes.
Clark?
Yes.
Wait.
No.
And then
So we'll go ahead and start preparing the RFP for auditing services for the fiscal years noted in that report.
Correct. And then as far as the changes to the, do you want to put that on the next meeting's agenda, or you want to talk about it now?
I'd like to mention that I think it's a wonderful idea. I would like to hear how our Visitors Bureau and our chamber feel about having the start and the finish in Solvang. I don't know if this is an appropriate time to get any input on that, if I could.
Yeah.
Okay, Tracy and Tracy.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. I think it's a great idea. I'm thrilled about having the event start and finish in town. It keeps them here longer. It means they spend the night in this section more. It's a great way to be able, they always ended early enough anyway that didn't impact retail businesses. And that way we keep that event coming to this town. And I think it's a wonderful vote of confidence that they want to be able to be in Solvang for the beginning and the end of it. I think it's quite doable and we support it.
Thank you.
And Tracy Beard?
I think on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, and having known the event for the last 7 years, I definitely think it starts around 8 o'clock and ends by 11, so I think it's a good program for us to have. And having been associated with the food bank for so many years, it is a very good program for our community.
Great.
So now, yeah.
Make a motion to approve the change.
A second?
Did you second, or do you want a second?
I'm saying I want a second.
I will second it.
All right, Lisa, take a roll call.
Councilmember Waite?
Yes.
Dearness?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Clark?
Yes. Okay, now, moving on to the regular business agenda. Lisa, would you please read the title for the agenda item number 6, please?
Item 6, employment agreement with the new city manager.
To adopt a resolution approving city manager employment agreement with David Gassaway effective April 8, 2019. Do you have a staff report? Rick?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Clark. Members of the City Council, back in July 2018, you'll recall that your former city manager, Brad Vidro, retired after serving 13 years with the city of Solvang. Soon thereafter, the city contracted with Bob Murray and Associates, a recruiting firm, to do a statewide recruitment for a new city manager. After numerous extended discussions during closed sessions and multiple candidate interviews over a period of a number of months, the city unanimously directed the city attorney to start preparing an employment contract with Mr. David Gassaway. Mr. Gassaway is here in attendance this evening with his family, and a little bit about Mr. Gassaway. He's currently the Community Development Director for the City of Indian Wells, where he oversees planning, building, code enforcement, housing, and economic development activities for the city. Prior to his current assignment, he was also the assistant to the city manager in Indian Wells from May of 2014 through June of 2016. Mr. Gassaway worked 5 years with the city of Rancho Cordova prior to Indian Wells in various administrative capacities and in different operating departments until he was promoted to the assistant to the city manager. As far as his background is concerned, he is a graduate of San Diego State University. He holds a master's degree in public administration from the University of San Francisco. He also has his certificate in advanced public engagement from Pepperdine University. He's currently a member of the International City and County Managers Association, the California City Management Foundation, Municipal Managers Association of Southern California, and the Alliance for Innovation. As far as the terms and conditions of his employment, the employment contract as drafted by our city attorney is attached for your review in the agenda packet. Overall, the terms and conditions are consistent with the direction given by the City Council in your last closed session. Some of the more noteworthy assignments in the agreement call for a 5-year term commencing on April the 8th, 2019, an annual base salary of $175,000, that the city provide Mr. Galloway the same health plans available to other management level positions within the city, standard leave balances consistent with the other management level positions in the city, including a one-time 40-hour administrative leave bank to commence upon his employment, a $5,000 city contribution towards deferred compensation, reimbursement of moving expenses, housing, automobile, and cell phone allowance as delineated in the attached employment agreement, which is consistent with other cities in the state of California, and also provisions for a 5-year city-provided 4% interest-only home loan should he need one in order to reside within the city limits of Solvang. In addition to the above compensation, Mr. Gassaway will also be reimbursed for other business-related expenses as dictated in his employment agreement. As far as the fiscal impact is concerned, Mr. Galloway's annual salary is less than that of the previous city manager. However, some of his benefits afforded him are a little bit different than the former manager, which will necessitate a future budget amendment once the costs are more clearly defined. You'll recall that the city comes forward on a quarterly basis with budget amendments. Actually, tonight on your city council agenda, we do have some budget amendments for your consideration. So we would fall in that same process once the costs are more clearly defined. As council is aware, the city manager's job is a highly complex one. The city manager serves as the chief executive officer and is responsible for the coordination and oversight of the activities and operations in the entire city of Solvang, subject to the policy direction of the city council. The incumbent will oversee all full-time, part-time employees, prepare annual budgets, direct and supervise the entire department heads, advise and assist the city council, network with civic leaders on matters affecting the city. With such a critical position, a competitive negotiated contract is warranted. Attached for council's consideration is a resolution adopting the employment contract for Mr. Gassaway. That concludes my report. Staff is available for any questions you may have.
Okay. I know David and his family are in the audience this evening, and I would like to first of all say that I was thoroughly impressed. And the two things that struck me during the interview process was one, and I know it sounds silly, but he really paid attention in college because everything we asked, he had an answer for like it was out of a textbook, and it was really, really impressive. Secondly is that he's worked with, under and then with some people that are extremely highly respected in the city manager's fields. I'm not familiar with your field that well, but from what I hear, there's some legends, and David has worked with them. So it was just a very, very, very impressive meetings that we had, and I, for one, as Mayor Pro Tem, I could not be happier that he's with us. So are there any other comments from other council?
Yes, I wish to welcome David Gassaway, and just my comment is that his references were outstanding from well-respected individuals in the field.
I too would like to welcome Mr. Gassaway and his family. I think we're really we look forward to the things that you'll do with us and for us. I think the community will be well served by not just his invaluable skill sets and expertise and experience, but also by his interpersonal skills. I think that was one of the things that impressed us all so much, was his ability to really listen and communicate well with us with respect to the questions that we had. And we believe he'll do the same for the community and some of the people that have concerns and questions about how we move forward as a city. So again, I think the city is well served. I think the business community is extremely well served by Mr. Gassaway. And I know that we're going to enjoy working with him in the future.
Yeah, I just like to welcome David as well. Go ahead and let your kids run around in here. That's absolutely no problem. Solvang's very kid-friendly, so we hope you feel welcome, and we're excited to have you here in the city and working with us.
And then I'll wrap it up with one more thing, is I want to thank, well, Gary got paid for it, but Gary from Bob Murray Associates did a lot of extra work. This whole process started before we had with the previous council. Transitioning to the new council, there was a lot more work being done. So between Lisa, thank you very, very much for the work that you put into this. Rick, you've been a true leader and a mentor and a teacher really for us in some of these things too. And Dave, you've had to do a lot of extra work on this. But I just want to say I really appreciate that all of you've done and helped us along with this process. And I really believe we made the right decision. So do we have a motion to adopt resolution approving the city manager employment agreement?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, you might want to open it up to the public in case
My apologies, I'm sorry. I would like to open this up to the public. If anybody from the public would like to come up and speak on this portion of the agenda, you're more than welcome to come up. Okay, we'll close it to public comment at this point. Now, would somebody like to make a motion?
Actually, I just want to make one comment. I want to thank our city staff for their involvement in the process also, so that the public knows that the city staff actually gave us quite a bit of valuable input regarding all of the candidates that were put in front of them. So thank you very much.
A very good point, thank you. Now, would we like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we go ahead and adopt or approve his contract.
Second?
Okay, I will go ahead and second and adopt resolution number 19, approving a city manager employment agreement with David Gassaway effective April 8th, 2019, and authorize the mayor pro tem to sign the said employment agreement.
Okay, having heard all that, Lisa, would you like to take a roll call, please?
Councilmember Dearness?
Yes.
Wade?
Yes.
Clark?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
At this time, I would like to ask David to just come up and say a few words, and congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council. It's really humbling to have all these nice things said about you, so I appreciate that. I look forward to becoming a part of the Solvang community. You know, I'm excited about our future together. Like many cities in California, Solvang is not without its challenges, but unlike many cities in California, Solvang is blessed with some advantages. It has an engaged and passionate citizenry, as I think we saw here tonight through some of the conversations under public comment. It is a desired place to live and a famous place to visit, which I think ensures that it has a strong economic foundation, and it has a committed and competent city staff that pride themselves in delivering services that residents can be proud of. It was these combination of factors that led me to apply and pursue the position here in Solvang and dedicate my energies in years to come to produce results for this community. In that vein, I commit tonight to 3 aspects of my leadership that this council can hold me accountable to. The first is a high ethical standard. As fiduciaries of the public trust, we owe it to the residents of Solvang to operate to the highest of ethical standards, and we will do that. The second is a transparent city operation. The more citizens know, the more they are able to provide positive input into the community's outcomes, and I commit to engaging the public in all of the matters that are important and incorporating their input into those outcomes. And then third is respect for a distinctive historical identity. Far and wide, Solvang has identified positively for its wonderful Danish heritage. As the city seeks and as we work together with this city council to identify a vision for the 21st century, I commit to understanding and paying homage to Solvang's cultural heritage and history. Over the coming months, I plan to get out into the community as much as possible, starting in April once I'm able to get here, and learn what I can to better understand excuse me, how we, the city's staff, can collectively deliver results that are expected by the community. With that, I would be remiss if I did not thank my wonderful wife, Janet, and our two boys. I think they have done as admirable job as two 2-year-olds can in a meeting of this type. So with that, we do have to get back to the desert tonight because I got to be in the office tomorrow morning. And so I thank you, and I look forward to getting to know everybody much better in years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Okay, moving on to the next item. Lisa, would you please read the title?
Item 7, 2019 Water Supply Status Report. Receive the February 2019 Water Supply Status Report. Provide staff with directions regarding drought restrictions, and provide staff with direction regarding possible purchase of supplemental water for 2019.
Thank you, Lisa. And report to be given by Matt Vanderlinden. Matt?
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem Clark and council members. Matt Vanderlinden, your Public Works Director and City Engineer. And I'm just waiting for the, here it goes, the projector to warm up. Sure, maybe one of those.
I'm afraid of the dark. That's not so bad.
Alrighty. So this is the 2019 water supply update. And I'd like to start out just giving a little outline of what I'm going to be covering. For starters, a summary of the 2019 water supply, our current water supply situation for 2019. Our current conditions, which will cover supplemental water purchases and our water conservation program. Then other water-related issues such as our drought restrictions, water supply projects, and our water supply management and water supply management plan. Talk about that briefly. And then we'll wrap up with a discussion of our long-range strategic planning. So is that clear to?
Yeah.
Okay. Just one. I was gonna focus it better if it wasn't, but so I do have to mention that this pie chart, this water supply projection, was prepared a week ago, and since that time, actually just last Thursday, the state water allocation went up from 15% up to 35%. So that will provide the city an additional 300 acre-feet of state water for 2019. So that state water allocation of 35% is still actually very low. The historic average is about 60%, and so we still are in kind of a scarce water supply situation statewide for this year at that 35% allocation. But it adds additional 300 acre feet to our planning that was prepared, that's shown in this pie chart. So essentially, we have planned for 2019 a total of 885 acre feet of state water. So you'll see in the pie chart it says 585. So we actually have 885. But the plan is to, we always want to do strategic carryover for the subsequent year. And so the plan is to carry over approximately 300 acre feet of water from 2019 into 2020. And that's a really critical aspect of our planning because we never know what the weather conditions are going to be in 2020. And we don't want to start the year in a hole without any water carrying over. So right now, if we have absolutely no state water, our wells, our river wells and upland wells, are not able to supply, meet the city's demands. So we're always trying to plan ahead, and so we do a 2-year planning projections, and we always want to try to carry over water into the next year. So then the light blue pie wedge there, that is our river wells. We're projecting to produce approximately 280 acre feet from our river wells. And I'll be talking more about the river wells a little bit later, but one critical thing you want to remember is part of our water supply planning is if Lake Achuma whenever Lake Achuma is really low, that means there's going to be very little water to be released during the summer months to replenish the river underflow and to replenish those river wells. So there were a couple years just recently during the drought where Lake Achuma actually went down to 7% at one point a couple years ago, and we had to do our water supply planning assuming we would get no water from our river wells. So that really puts us in a straitjacket, or handcuffs us, so to speak, or handicaps us in our planning. But right now, like I said, I'll talk about the river wells more, but fortunately, Lake Achuma is going up. And so the next portion of the pie is our upland wells, and we're projecting producing about 302 acre feet from those wells, and then 103 acre feet from ID1. Generally, the state shuts down the state water system every November for major maintenance on the pipeline and pump stations and canals and everything. And during that time period, our wells are also not able to provide the full amount of water. I think there's been past years where we had a really wet November, and the water demands were really low, and then our wells actually, under those conditions, could provide meet the full demand. But typically in November, sometimes we get a little bit of rain or whatever, but it's not enough, and demands are usually higher than what our wells can provide, and so we have to open up. We have 2 metered connections with ID1. We open up those metered connections and we take water from them. Again, that's typically in November, December. So this is an update. These numbers were updated on Friday. These numbers are continuing to change. So if you were to look at these percentages tomorrow, you would see that they've already changed a little bit. But as of Friday, Lake Achuma was at 61% full. The Oroville Reservoir, which is the main reservoir for the state water project, the state water system, was at 54% full, which is actually quite low for this time of year. And the state water allocation, as I said, on Thursday, it went up to 35%. So this just shows the San Luis Reservoir where we have our carryover water stored. And you'll see here, this blue shaded area is the historical average. And this dark blue line is where we are right now. So the state, because of climate change, the state has had to adjust the way it operates the San Luis Reservoir and the Oroville Reservoir. And so you see it's filled up right now much higher than what the historic average would be, and that's even with a state water allocation only at 35%. I mean, this might make sense in the past if the state water allocation was like 85%, or we had just tons of water everywhere we didn't know what to do with. But now, even with the 35% allocation, they're filling it higher than the historical average. And if it gets up to this line, that's when they technically refer to it as spilling. Technically, it doesn't actually spill water out of any spillway or anything, but it's sort of like an in lieu situation where they're no longer able to pump state water into it for further storage. And so any water that is from the prior year is technically on paper spilled and lost. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we've been doing to protect that water in just a minute. But this graph basically just shows you that they're filling the San Luis Reservoir greater than the historic average, even during a relatively low state water allocation point. And this is the Oroville Reservoir. Again, here you can see the historical average. And all during these months, they've been releasing water from the Oroville Reservoir. And the state has had to adjust the operation of the Oroville Reservoir because of climate change. More precipitation in the Sierra Nevada mountains is coming in the form of rain and less in the form of snow. And then also, they have to be prepared for a like a late winter or early spring rain that's really warm that actually will melt some of the snow prematurely and produce these really huge runoff events that the reservoir really originally wasn't designed for. So they're basically operating it artificially low through the whole first part of the winter, and that's why our allocation is only 35%, even though we've had all this rain. So at the request of Councilman DeJarnis, we've added this supplemental water purchase, a little bit of the history of our supplemental water purchases. And so this, of course, was during the drought years. And there's a bar graph that I'll flip to in just a second. But in 2013, we purchased 850 acre-feet of supplemental water. In 2014, 692 acre-feet. 2015, we purchased 350 acre-feet. That acronym there is the Antelope Valley East Kern Water Agency, right here, Antelope Valley East Kern Water Agency. So we actually did an exchange. We basically, we made a payment to borrow 350 acre-feet, and then we had to pay that back over the next few years, which we were able to pay back in 2017. But in 2014, when we got this 692 acre-feet of water, 500 of that acre-feet was from the Biggs West Gridley Water District. This is Big West Gridley Water District. That's a water district that's an agricultural water district with rice farmers north of Sacramento, in the Sacramento Valley, Central Valley. And we purchased we purchased water from them, and what we wanted to have delivered to us was 500 acre-feet. But whenever water moves from the north side of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta to the south side of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, there are what they call carriage losses. Some of the water is lost just because it's going through this natural estuary, and the way all the pump stations and canals and everything are situated, some of that water is actually lost. In DWR's accounting, Department of Water Resources, in their accounting, you lose some of that water. So they originally estimated back in 2014 that we would have 35% carriage losses. So the city actually purchased the amount of water so that we would have delivered 500 acre-feet. So I didn't actually do the math before the meeting, but we purchased, like 650 acre-feet of water, knowing that we were going to lose, or maybe it was like 600 or 700 acre-feet of water, knowing that we're going to lose a lot under these carriage losses. Well, what happens is the carriage losses aren't calculated by DWR until the very end of the year, till December. So the water's moving through there all since like from May all the way through like November. And they don't calculate the actual losses till a couple months later. And so what happened is the carriage losses ended up being less than what they calculated, and they said, hey, you could, there's 116 acre-feet extra that you have. And so we actually were only planning to secure 350 acre-feet during 2015, but we ended up having this extra because the carriage losses were lower than expected. So again, there's really kind of no way we could have predicted that. We just wanted to order enough water to guarantee we had 500 from Biggs West Gridley in 2014. So anyway, so that's the explanation of why we had that 116 acre-feet. So this bar chart here shows you, these are our three purchases, 850, 692, and 466, these green bars. That's the extra or supplemental water, state water that we purchased. And this orange bar here shows you the actual, how much we lost in a spill of the San Luis Reservoir in 2017. But actually, so the gray bars here are what the state water allocation is. So you'll see here, we had the 525, 75, and 300. And prior to this drought, the lowest state water allocation that had ever occurred was a 35% allocation. So we had a 35% allocation, and then a 5% allocation. It was unheard of. In fact, it was at zero. We thought we were going to have to pay $3 million for the mortgage payment for the the facilities, our mortgage payment for our capacity and all the in the pipeline and the pump stations and everything, and get zero water. But at the last minute, they bumped it up to 5%. So we only got 75 acre-feet. So we were thought of as geniuses that we had purchased all this extra water the year before, and we're not geniuses. I'm just saying it looked like a genius move. We bought all this large amount, and the intent this year was to purchase water so that we'd have some of it carry over into the next year. But then with the 5% allocation, we said, oh, wow, we're really going to be hurting. So we purchased some more, and then again. So the important thing to remember, so we purchased this amount. Again, it was $350, but we got the extra 116. But this purchase actually happens at the beginning of the year. So we're seeing what's happening in the winter in November, December, and then January, February, and we have to take action. We can't wait till April, hope that it rains, because if it doesn't, we're completely screwed, basically. Excuse my French. But anyway, so at the beginning of the year, we're having to make decisions before we know the full outcome of the winter. And so this water was purchased at the beginning of 2015. And this water was lost, it actually spilled in 2018. But it was our 2017 carryover water that was spilled in February of 2018. So we're showing it in this year, 2017. So the point is, from this time period to the beginning of 2015, when we made this last purchase, to the time it spilled was actually in February of 2018. It's almost 3 full years. And so really what the staff researched and presented to the City Council, and we did make some recommendations, and what the City Council did to purchase this supplemental water, these 3 green bars here, was brilliant, because it was like a really low-cost insurance policy to ensure the health and safety of the community, the residents and the businesses, to make sure we had water in the pipes didn't go dry during the worst drought years here, you see. And because we don't have a crystal ball or a magic wand, and we can't predict the future, we did make this last purchase here at the beginning of 2015. But then in 2016, you see, we had this is a 60% allocation, which is basically the long-term average. And our water customers, all through these years, we had the stage 2 drought restrictions and with penalties. So the other factor, the other sort of unknown or curve in this whole equation is that we don't know how the customers are going to respond and conserve. So in fact, one of the years, I probably should have looked that up before the meeting, but one of these years in January and February, it was in the middle of the drought, and the residents, the customers' water usage was really high because we had some dry, warm months in January and February. And so, I mean, the staff we were sweating bullets, because we didn't know how the customers were going to respond. But fortunately, especially in 2016, the drought restrictions were still in place, stage 2 drought restrictions. The customers really conserved, and with the 60% allocation, we ended up with this high amount of carryover. So, but we could never have foreseen that back here at the beginning of 2015. Anyway, so this just presents a summary. This is the amount that was lost, and but that's a very cheap insurance policy, again, to protect the health and safety of the community. So as far as water conservation, we have our landscape rebate program. That began in 2015, and in those first 2 years, 2015-16, we participated in a countywide program, and Solvang actually had the highest per capita conservation in the whole county. So we were really happy about that. We had 42 rebates during that time period, and that program is ongoing. We have a low-flow toilet rebate program that is also ongoing. We implemented on a trial basis a rain barrel rebate program. There wasn't really that much interest. We only did a few rebates, and so we've discontinued that program. And then we continue, of course, with our public education and outreach. We do occasional press releases, media releases, and then we also include messaging in our water bills and do some outreach, more so during the heaviest drought years, do outreach with our businesses, especially the hotels and restaurants. And regarding other water-related issues, the drought restrictions went into place on January 13, 2014. That was the stage 1 drought restrictions went into place. And it's interesting to note, Solvang was the first agency in Santa Barbara County to implement drought restrictions. And there was a lot of media hype here about that. And we actually implemented the drought restrictions about a week before Governor Brown declared a state of emergency, a state of drought emergency for the state of California. So we were really monitoring the situation as closely as we could. Then stage 2 drought restrictions went into place in July of 2014, so just about 7 months after the stage 1 restrictions. And then, again, that was following a 5%, or right in the midst of that 5% state water allocation. And then with the rain in 2017, the stage 2 restrictions were rescinded in April. And we would like the City Council to consider how to move forward with the stage 1 restrictions, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. So what we've been doing as far as water supply projects, in September 2016, we finished and put into service the new HCA well. That stands for Hans Christian Andersen, because it's at the lower end of the park. So that new well went in September 2000, or went into service. And then well 4 was completely refurbished, and the life of that well has now been extended probably 30 years with this refurbishment project. And that was completed in June 2017, and now well 22 has been completed. We do have a few punch list items to finish up with well 22 and get the final state approval, but that well should be ready to go into service this spring. And then as far as future planning, we're working on a project for 2 additional new river wells. We're working on the process to amend our permit with the state. That's the State Water Resources Control Board, that acronym there. Lots of acronyms, sorry about that. So we're working with the state and ID1 and Alisal Ranch to come to agreement on operations of Solvang's wells associated with amending that permit. And then this last year, City of Solvang participated with the County of Santa Barbara in a countywide stormwater resources plan. And there are 2 projects that were identified that the city is considering in the future. One is to implement a stormwater capture facility underneath Parking Lot 5. Parking Lot 5 is the new parking lot that will be designed next year and built the following year across the street from City Hall right here. And so under that parking lot, we're planning, as part of the storm drain system that runs through there, we're planning a facility that will siphon off some of that water and allow it to infiltrate and replenish the groundwater basin. And then also in Hans Christian Andersen Park, there's a large detention basin that serves the Skip Mesa residential development. And a project was identified where during heavy rain we could siphon off some of that water and put it into dry wells that would allow that water to percolate and infiltrate down, and then also replenish the groundwater basin in that area. And since we have the new well in that area, that'll help help the groundwater in that vicinity. We also have we've completed our water supply management plan, and I didn't actually mention this earlier, but in 2017, in the summer of 2017, it was clear that the San Luis Reservoir was staying really high because we had that wetter than expected winter. And so in order to minimize the loss of any spill water, we implemented an exchange with ID1. And so we actually brokered the deal at the end of the summer of 2017, and they were able to use 285 acre-feet of our state water, so therefore wouldn't be in the San Luis Reservoir subject to spill. And then they paid us that, or they're paying us that water back the following 2 years. So in 2018, they paid us back 140 acre-feet, and this year they'll pay us back 145 acre-feet. So that worked out really well. The water supply management plan recommends banking state water when the allocation is high. Right now, we haven't really identified any good options for that, for banking water. There are some Central Valley projects for banking water, but it's pretty costly. But anyway, that's something we're going to continue to explore. And then we're recommending a long-term exchange agreement with ID1, similar to the one that was done in 2017. As far as our long-range strategic planning, as I mentioned, all of our water supply planning that we do primarily in the fall of each year, we do a 2-year projection. During the drought, the staff updated the municipal code covering drought regulations to make it more up to date. It was last updated, I think, in the 80s, so it needed to be updated quite badly. Of course, I talked about all the supplemental water purchases. That's evaluated annually whether we need to do that or not. We've implemented those different capital projects and our water conservation programs. And then in 2015, also during the drought, we did the city's first ever water supply management plan. We also, the city council also reacquired 300 acre-feet of suspended Table A state water. That's through CCWA, and it's kind of a long story about that, but basically when the county originally contracted for state water, they signed an agreement that would allow them to take more than what they're taking now. And so there was that difference, that delta between what the original contract allowed and what they ended up taking. And the county maintained the right to request that extra at a later date. And so that extra amount is actually about 11,200 acre-feet, something like that. But the city of Santa Maria is requesting quite a bit, and a couple other agencies, but Solvang, the city council approved pursuing the 300 acre-feet for the city of Solvang. And then, of course, just recently we updated the water supply management plan looking at water quality and how that affects the effluent of the wastewater treatment plant. And then just recently, in the last month or two, we've worked with the Montecito Water District and the City of Santa Barbara to minimize any loss of our current spill water, current carryover water. So we have 515 acre-feet of carryover from 2018 going into 2019. And with the deals that we've worked out, and also the state water that we've used already in January and February, based on CCWA's accounting of everything, it looks like we're at very low risk of losing any, and definitely would be well under 100 acre-feet if we do lose any spill water. So, and then the Water Ad Hoc Committee is recommended to pursue, again, the long-term Solvang ID1 exchange agreement. So at this point, the staff is looking for direction from the City Council regarding the drought restrictions. So we currently are still under the Stage 1 restrictions, and staff recommends just continuation of that. And that is a voluntary 15% cutback that we're requesting of all the customers. So it's totally voluntary, but it's a 15% voluntary cutback we're requesting. And the supplemental water purchase for 2019, at this point, because of the recent change in the state water allocation, the staff recommends that we just hold off for now and continue to monitor the situation, but it does not look like we're going to need to purchase any supplemental water for 2019. So with that, I'm available for questions, and again, we are requesting the City Council direction on these two items.
Thank you, Matt. Yep. Thank you very much, Matt. Would council like to start questions of anything? Anybody want to start? Chris?
So many questions, but since you brought up this last comment, I thought was kind of interesting. This Stage 1 restriction is totally voluntary, right?
Correct.
Which means nobody has to pay any attention to this, right? Technically speaking?
Well,
you'd like them to.
The 15% cutback is voluntary, but with the Stage 1 restrictions, there are certain things that are prohibited, certain wasteful uses of water that are prohibited. So it does provide a good benefit from that regard. So if someone is out and their sprinkler system is spraying all over the sidewalk, we notify them and we give them 2 warnings, and after that, they can be fined if they don't fix it. And it's things like that. So there's about a half a dozen requirements that our customers need to follow, even though the cutback of 15% is voluntary, but there are about a half a dozen regulations that are in place.
Okay, my question is there a connection between the different stages of drought restriction and the cost of water for the end user, whether it's a resident or a business? So, for example, as we go up the level of restrictions, say to Stage 2, 3, and 4, does the cost of water also increase? Is there a market-based approach to that?
Okay, well, it doesn't actually work quite that way. What happens is when the water supply is scarce. Okay, so it's just like supply and demand. When the supply is low and the demand's high, the prices go up, right? So
the city, yes.
Right, for everybody.
Do we pass that along to the customers?
No, the water rates remain unchanged unless approved by the City Council.
Okay, so that's the disconnect. Look, as an economist, I'm trying to expose a problem where the city costs continue to rise because our costs rise, but we don't have a mechanism of passing it on to the end user so that they realize we have a problem. We're in Stage 5 drought, for example, and we need to all start to cut back. And normally, when there is a restriction in supply in the market, the prices go up and the demand starts to fall naturally because of higher prices. But in this case, there's a disconnect, right?
Well, water does not follow the typical supply and demand economics. If you're making widgets and the demand goes way up, you can jack the price way up, right? In this case, we're a public agency for one thing, so we're not actually seeking to make any profit. We're just seeking to cover the costs and maintain the reserve. So when water is scarce, it's up to the City Council to decide whether to implement Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3, or Stage 4. And with Stage 3, with our new regulations, actually it might be even Stage 2 and 3, I believe, the City Council has the ability to impose penalties for excessive usage. And so if customers want to use a lot of water and keep their lawn green through the drought, they can do so, but they're going to have to pay a premium based on the penalties that the City Council sets. So all of that is subject to the city council. The staff presents the information, and in some cases makes recommendations, and the city council deliberates and provides staff with the direction. So, so we're not, yeah. So I'm not sure if I answer your question exactly, but
I'm doing this more for the residents than for us as a council. I mean, I appreciate your attempt to address this in the sense that there is no public market, right? Essentially, we can retroactively penalize people because they use too much water. That's what you're telling us. And that's based on council agreeing that we have a problem, and so we're going to raise the level of restriction.
Correct.
But unfortunately, there is no market mechanism, a direct market mechanism. And it's unfortunate because if residents and businesses understood that we have a problem, the state has decided that we're not going to get as much water as we would like to have, we can't just pass it on directly to them. There's no direct correlation. And therein lies the problem. So we're always kind of reacting instead of being proactive. And that's a problem going forward.
well, one of the things that the staff did do is worked with our water rate consultant back in 2011, and we set up a water rate structure that was that allowed us to better survive through the drought. So a lot of agencies didn't have a good rate structure for going through a drought period. And so if you look at our reserve now, we've constructed 2 new wells that cost approximately $1 million each for the full cost for the environmental review, the engineering, the construction, inspection, and all that. We made these supplemental water purchases, and we survived pretty well through the drought, and our water reserve is very healthy.
So you're not really answering the question, but that's okay. What you're saying is, in order to deal with the supply problem, we brought in new wells. But as far as the direct correlation between what we pay and what the end person pays is not necessarily there, right?
Well, the other thing you have to keep in mind is Prop 218, there's state law that governs how we can raise the rates. So we have to prove and demonstrate through the water rate study that this is the cost, this is our cost to operate the system, and plus any capital projects that we need to plan for in a 5-year horizon, and whatever level is appropriate to maintain in the reserve. So because water is critical to life, obviously, state law is very strict on how we can raise those rates and affect the customers.
Okay.
So
actually, that's very helpful. Is there a way to inform the residents and the businesses, the users of the water, that our costs are going up, so get ready? And can we put that on our website?
No.
Sure.
I'm sorry. I mean, can I address it?
Yeah, of course.
We also have a member of ID1 out in the audience, which I think is very valuable. I've been through the Prop 218 process, and there are so many steps you have to take in order to raise rates to the customers. And you have to also realize that Solvang is a customer of ID1, and we pass that cost onto our residents. So we can't just simply go out there and say, hey, we might raise your rates. There are so many legal notifications that have to go out behind or in front of that. Okay. I think that the fee penalty that we have in place right now has been pretty effective. Mm-hmm. And if you have really detailed questions regarding that, I mean, certainly Mr. Clay could address how ID1, our major delivery source of water, addresses this. And ID1, where are you right now? What level are you? Are you at 1 or 2?
Drought?
Yeah.
Yeah, technically 1, but it's pretty much non-existent as far as our users are concerned.
Let me try asking this question a different way. Okay. What I'm trying to do is help the residents and the businesses to understand for lack of a better word, the potential, the threat level, if you will, of the increase in cost of water to the city. Doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to pass it on directly to them because there's no market mechanism to do that. All we can do is use retroactive penalties, as you pointed out. And there are Prop 218 issues, as you pointed out. All I'm suggesting is there a way to communicate that to the public at large so that everybody knows this is where we're at? Because we had a wonderful rainy season this year, and yet our water allocation is barely 35%.
Right. Well, as indicated, even with that 35%, because of the prior city councils, some of their decisions and the staff doing our best to try to carefully manage that supply, we're not going to have to purchase, it doesn't look like we're going to need to purchase any supplemental water, and we're actually in pretty good shape. We have the new well that's going to be going online. But certainly we can communicate. We're always, as part of our water conservation program, we're always trying to encourage people to conserve, to replace their lawns with drought-tolerant landscaping, to do all these type of things to conserve water and to be conscientious about it. So if there's any messaging, additional messaging you'd like us to make, we're happy to do that. Right now, we are looking pretty good as far as the water supply, and our water fund reserve is healthy. So, the staff's happy to do whatever the city council wants to direct us to do.
My point is there a way to communicate that to the public? And the answer is yes, there is a way. The question is, what should we communicate to them with respect to Proposition 218, right? At the same time, I think what you've done so far is going in the right direction. When I was looking into this over the last 2 years, it was like a black box. It was really hard to understand what our costs were, right, and what our uses were. So if you could continue to develop that and then, I don't know, write up some quick summary that you can post on our city website, then people can get a stronger sense of how much water do we use as a community, where the water's coming from, what the costs are, and what we're doing to mitigate those issues.
Sure, we could do a little summary that we put on the website.
That would be fantastic.
I think something we could do as well, Chris, is we can do it with our budgeting as well. We can show the actual costs and the projected costs through the budgeting, so that when we can point out in the budget, hey, this cost is going to be here based on water usage and our costs, because as you said, the city, their cost keeps increasing no matter what. So at least residents can see that. At least money-wise.
I think that's great. Then it'd probably be reflected in the CAFR report afterward, because the budget shows what we think we're going to spend, right?
Right.
And the CAFR report, we go back and say, here's what we spent. So is there a way to put that in the CAFR report going forward? Maybe a half a page, one-page summary?
That could be an item that is addressed later on this evening when we get a report from our auditor and director of finance.
Perfect.
I just wanted to make sure that my council members understand that I'm against any type of, the way you had posed it was almost as a scare tactic, as we're going to raise your rates unless you cut back. And believe me, I've been through this, and you don't want to do it that way. So I think putting it out, like you said, Daniel, in numbers and figures, so that's obvious to the public, is a better way to address it.
I appreciate that, but that was not the intent at all.
Good.
The intent was to try and explain to the public that there's a breakdown between the market, a typical market where you have supply and demand, the price is completely reflected in that supply and demand, versus a public market where we buy it at one price and then we have to somehow recover the cost after the fact. And the only mechanism that we have is things like penalties. And this isn't a scare tactic. This is really an attempt to try and explain to not just me, but the people of the public, this is how it's done. Whether it's not a perfect system, we wish it could be more responsive so that people would try to save water more quickly. I think everybody wants to save water. I don't think anybody wants to waste water.
Yeah, I agree. It's really hard because they're saying, oh, you're only at 35%, yet outside it's pouring rain. So people do have questions. They do probably wonder, why the heck is our rates not going down, or why do we still have to pay so much? And it's hard for them to understand, obviously. So I think that there is some discussion that should be had about properly presenting it to the public so that they can understand it. And I think that's it's very hard to do, especially with the financials. After reading the financials, that kind of stuff is very hard to understand and discern what it is actually saying. So I think we can work on that.
Well, here's another issue. For example, if you look at the the Oroville Dam, it's only, what, 54% full? Maybe it's a little bit more since you published those numbers. At the same time, the San Luis Reservoir is almost completely full. It's like 95% full. And that's not normal, is it? Usually it's the other way around.
Well, Orville, they can't fill right now.
Well, the point is they were taking water from Orville, putting it in San Luis, because they were afraid that there would be some an unusual runoff, right?
Correct.
All right, so you're trying to adapt and adjust to that as well.
Correct, yes.
And as a result, we're ending up with a smaller allocation than normal because of what the state's trying to do.
Right.
And here we are trying to understand it ourselves and explain this to our constituents, and it's like, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, it is. We did try. I can't claim to be the greatest writer in the world, but we did try to explain that in the staff report. But I've made a note, and we'll try to put a summary together to explain that, and we can create a flyer that we can put in the water bill and put on our website to kind of explain the situation with how the state's having to adjust how they operate the system and how that affects our water supply, and please continue conserving.
The problem is we have some of the highest cost water in the county. And the question is, why is that the case?
Well, we used to. Now, we're no longer the highest. There's a couple of agencies that are higher than us now. And we haven't raised the water rates in the last 2 years.
And I appreciate that effort, I really do.
Well,
but the point is, I think that the residents are trying to understand why their rates are so high vis-a-vis the other communities.
Yeah.
And this is a good example. I mean, we're in a box, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
How do we explain that?
Yeah. So we'll work on a summary that we can put in the water bill and on the website.
I think another idea, Matt, would just be any resident should be able to come in and sit down with you for a couple, 3, 4, 5 hours and just go over all of this whenever they see fit, right?
I think every resident
super
should be
interesting.
able to come talk to you for 4 hours. I have just a question. And on the water banking, you said 22 is online shortly, and 23 is not factored in, right? Any water, when you're discussing water banking, you said 22 is online shortly.
Oh, the well, you mean?
Yes.
Well, the discussion I apologize if I was unclear, but the wells really don't have anything to do with water banking.
Okay.
Yeah. So the water banking. So what would be like really ideal is, which we've had discussions with the city of Santa Maria, but it's really not going to work out at this point. But let's say we had a high water allocation, and we gave that water to Santa Maria, or we exchanged it with them, and let's say 400 acre feet or whatever. So we have a high allocation year, we have more state water than we need, and we say, okay, we'll let you guys have 400 acre feet of our water this year, and then give us some of that 100 acre feet back over the next 4 years. And so when they have the 400 acre feet extra the first year, that means they don't have to pump their groundwater basin as much. So now that water's left and preserved in their groundwater basin, and then the subsequent 4 years, they could pump extra or let some of their state water go down the pipeline past Santa Maria to us to take out at our turnout. But the problem that they have is similar to our problem, is they're trying to balance, so they have that basin, they physically could do that, okay? But the problem that they have is they're trying to balance blending state water and groundwater to reduce the calcium and magnesium levels down, to soften the water so that they meet their effluent discharge requirements at their wastewater treatment plant. So, so for them to manage their water like that, it doesn't give them a lot of flexibility to do a banking project with Solvang. So, doing a long-term exchange, if we can implement a long-term exchange with ID1, an agreement like what we did a year and a half ago, and it would be a flexible agreement where, okay, on those years where we do have extra water, we can send it down to them, and they can leave the water in the groundwater basin there and not have to pump as much because they're getting more state water, and then return some of that over the subsequent years. So in a sense, we're sort of banking it in the groundwater basin with them. So, so that's, we need to have conversations with them about that. And so it'd be kind of building on the 2-year exchange that we did, but try to have something in place where each winter we have conversations, see where we're at, and if we have some extra, we let them take it and they pay us back later. So that's kind of what staff's recommending.
Is there a way to develop a minimum purchase from them so that we get a more favorable rate?
That's been discussed in the past, and it's more problematic than just doing this exchange type of situation. So I think doing exchange is that's what staff recommends pursuing first, and see if we can come up with something that's really favorable. Because in addition to doing an exchange, we can have them return some of that water in November, December, and instead of paying the high cost through those meters, we still would have the monthly meter fee, but we can they can just be returning the water to us through those 2 meters. So we're not actually paying for the water itself. They're just returning what we gave them in the exchange. Yeah. So that's an additional financial benefit that we could possibly work out with them. So that's what we recommend pursuing first.
And all the figures that you're basing this off of, this is all current data, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, well, the water supply management plan was updated through 2017. Yeah, because they were actually working on it during 2018. So the 2018 numbers aren't in the water supply management plan, but it's the same. Yeah, the 2018 numbers don't change any of our recommendations.
Yes, okay, you're comfortable with that?
Correct, yeah.
All right. Okay. At this point, open it up to public speakers. Anybody has any questions or like to come address the council on the water issues or what Matt has brought up? There are no speakers at this time. Closing public portion. Do I have a motion to adopt my wording? Receive the report, concur with staff's recommendations, and concur with staff's, what are we voting on? I apologize. As far as concurring with staff's recommendation, to continue with stage 1 recommendations?
Correct. Yes.
Correct.
So accept the report and give us direction. So if you concur with our the staff recommendation, you can just make a motion to accept the report and stick with the staff recommendation.
If you concur with the recommendations, all in favor say aye. We don't have to take a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Moving on to the next, that's unanimous. Moving on to the next item.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate it. Next item, Lisa, would you please read the title?
Item A, Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Accept into the record the 2017-18 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report as presented by Terry Krieg, CPA.
Thank you, Lisa. Sandra, Director of Administrative Services.
Let me go grab him real quick. Okay, thanks.
Do you guys want a break? You okay without a break? You're okay without a break?
Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. Sandra Featherston, your Director of Administrative Services, here to present the fiscal year 2017-18 financial highlights and the comprehensive annual financial report. At some point, I will turn it over to Terry Krieg, the City Auditor, for discussion of the actual CAFR report. So annually, we give an update to the City Council on how we did in the prior year. I've included a table in the staff report that shows the ending balance for each of the funds for the city and as compared to the prior year, fiscal year 16-17. You'll notice that the general fund had an increase of about $865,000, and that's due primarily to an increase in tax revenue, donations, and interest income, as well as spending less than the prior year in certain categories, such as transfers out to the water fund, as well as various projects. I also have another chart that shows a comparison for the general fund in terms of the different revenue sources and where they compared to fiscal year 16-17, as well as the different expenditure categories. Excuse me. Things like taxes are our transit occupancy tax, our property tax and sales tax. Donations, we've received quite a bit of donations from a community member for the specific purpose to go to the HCA tennis courts. We've had more significant interest income based on the increase in LAIF in the percentage that we're receiving on the local agency investment fund, where the city has about $20 million invested. So as that the interest rates have increased, the city has done much better in terms of the interest revenue that we're receiving, as well as our CD investments. And then things like reimbursements and transfers, those represent money that comes in from gas tax revenue, our local transportation fund, and traffic safety funds, and a portion of that money is transferred to the general fund for road purposes. In terms of expenditures between 17 and 18, you'll notice the county and other contracted services increased. That was primarily due to the law enforcement contract with Santa Barbara County. In services, we have things like insurance, sidewalk grinding, street sweeping, and then we have our other categories there. In terms of the transfers, in 16-17, we had a significant transfer to the water fund for the water meter replacement project, and also to our capital projects fund in 16-17 for the LSL seismic bridge project. And in 17-18, that $305,000 represents a transfer to the water fund to accelerate the meter replacement project. So those are some of the highlights for 17-18. The general fund currently has a total fund balance of about $10.9 million. We have the 50% as required by our fund balance policy set aside for emergencies. And then the other designations for the general fund are as follows. In unassigned, that's money available to spend as the council determines. That's about $5.9 million. The committed for emergencies is $4.8. The non-spendable is about $85,000. We have a recycling grant of $15,000, and those tennis facilities, we have set aside about $43,000. During the coming months, as part of the annual budgeting process, staff will return to talk a little bit more about ways to utilize those funds, the unassigned, as well as I know there have been requests to talk more about our other post-employment benefits, that liability, as well as our overall pension liability. In terms of the other funds, the enterprise funds, water, wastewater, and transit, the water fund increased its fund balance by about $943,000. The wastewater utilized some of its fund balance, which means it basically ate into its reserves by about $251,000. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then the transit fund added a small amount, $27,000, to their reserves. The wastewater had a higher operating cost because they are, and Matt can attest to this, working towards meeting their regulatory requirements for wastewater. And so those costs have increased the operating costs for the treatment plant. The unrestricted net position is basically the balance that the fund has to work with. And so the water fund, that unrestricted net position is about $7.6 million. Wastewater is $3.7, and transit is $1.2. And the difference between that unrestricted net position and the fund balance is the amount invested in capital assets. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry to talk a little bit more about the CAFR and the transactions in the CAFR itself, and then I'll be available for questions.
Thank you, Sandra.
Well, good evening, Mayor Pro Temp and council members, and thank you for inviting me here to present to you your June 30, 2018 audited financial statements. I have completed that audit and expressed an independent accountant's opinion that your financial statements do present fairly the financial position of the city's activities, and the financial position of the city's major funds, all in conformity with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. I do point out in this year's auditor's opinion that the city did in fiscal 18 implement the new accounting standards for other post-employment benefits in its 2018 financial statements. That had the effect of reducing the city's overall financial position, I think by about approximately $1.9 million to implement that new accounting standard, which is the requirement now that's imposed by local governments, very somewhat similar to the pension accounting standards that have been in place for, I think, about 2014. The organization of that report, as you may know, and I'll take a little bit of time to go over that because I think there's some new council members here, is your comprehensive annual financial report has several sections. One being the introductory section, which contains the city's transmittal letter prepared by your city manager and your Director of Administrative Services, which is a brief discussion of the city's situation and operations. And then there's also a certificate that the city received last year for its 2017 comprehensive annual financial report from the Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada for excellence in financial reporting in terms of the document that was prepared and released by the city for 2017. That award is not an ongoing thing. It's something that the city submits each year for review, and how that works is your actual financial statements are reviewed by other city managers, other finance directors could be from other states throughout the United States to see if it conforms with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States, is readable, and as well organized in the sense of the standards that are in place for cities in the United States. Then there's also the financial section, which has my auditor's report. The management and discussion and analysis section, that section actually is prepared by Sandra, and it outlines, I think, some detailed financial information about the changes in your different funds and the results of operations and more significant financial items that are contained in your financial statements. Now, that format and the content of that document is prescribed by the Government Accounting Standards Board, and that's the method that Sandra uses and follows to prepare that document. Then, in addition, there are the basic financial statements, and they consist of two perspectives. One is what they call the government-wide financial statement. That is the statement of net position and the statement of activities. Those two statements treat the city as if it were a commercial business. Depreciation is recorded as you would record in a corporate environment. All your receivables and all your debts are also there. But it treats the city not on a fund basis, but on an entity basis. And that's why you'll see in that statement the city's unfunded liability for pensions, and also your unfunded liability for other post-employment benefits. They appear only actually in those two government-wide statements because they're not reported in the fund statements themselves because they follow a different set of accounting principles. Then in addition, there's notes to the financial statements, and that discusses the city's policies for presenting the financial statements, as well as additional disclosures about your cash and investments, your pension obligations, and your other post-employment obligations, as well as if you had any long-term debt obligations, that would be disclosed as well. Then there's an additional section called the required supplemental information. One of the requirements is to present a schedule of your general fund and its budget to actual results at the end of each fiscal year, and then as well as the same type of schedule for any sort of major special revenue fund. And then there's additional schedules required in regard to the city's pension obligations, as well as your other post-employment benefit obligations. Then after that required section, there's a supplemental section that contains the combining balance sheet of your so-called non-major funds and statement of revenues and expenditures, and budget to actual comparisons for your smaller non-major funds. And then lastly, there's a section called the statistical section, and the content of that section as to what can be in there and what can't be in there is also prescribed by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement number 44. So there's limitations on what can go in the document and what cannot go in the document, and those are prescribed by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Pretty much that's what's actually the format and content of this comprehensive annual financial report. What I'd like to talk about is maybe an overview on a different perspective of what's in your 2018 financial statements. On an overall basis, the city's actual net position increased by about $2.1 million at the end of fiscal 2018 compared to about a $2.3 million increase in 2017, which is a healthy way to go. I mean, there's other cities that are not having positive increases in their net position, but Solvang is fortunate enough to be in basically a good financial position. Of that increase, your governmental funds, that's funds other than your water and your wastewater and transit, they contributed about $1.4 million of a positive increase in your net position, while your business type activities, the water, the wastewater, and the transit combined, they contributed a positive $720,000 increase in the city's overall financial position. So the fund statements break the city apart into two kind of concepts, one being your traditional governmental funds and the other being your business type funds such as your water, your wastewater, and your transit fund. Most of the reason for the increase in the city's net position in fiscal 2018 was really the result of your spending being in the aggregate less than your inflow of revenues, and that's why you have a positive increase in your 2018 financial position. And talk about a little bit about why there was this strength in your revenues. There was actually a $1.1 million decrease in the city's overall revenues in fiscal 18 compared to fiscal 2017. And most of that was caused by, in fiscal 2017, the city was the recipient of about a $900,000 federal grant for a bridge retrofit project. And also you had, I think, an additional $150,000 in capital connection fees for your water and your wastewater funds as a result of residential development. So even though there was a reduction in your revenues on an overall basis, your expenses actually decreased by a net $246,000. And the largest decrease in expenses were in the general government category. And that's because of the swing on these GASB 68 pension actuarial reports. In the statement of activities, that's not a fund statement, that's the city as a total entity. What is incorporated into those government-wide statements are actuarial reports, which are non-transaction amounts. That's based on an actuarial evaluation of your pension plan and an actuarial evaluation of your other post-employment benefits. So they will swing dramatically from year to year based upon the actuarial evaluation. And one of the significant things that drive those changes are changes in the discount rate. As the discount rate, which is an assumption, goes up, actually that's to your benefit, but actually what's happened is it's been lowered in the last couple of years, and it was lowered again last year, which is a primary, which basically translates into the actuarial evaluation having less earnings in terms of what was expected. And as your earnings in this actuarial evaluation goes down, your pension liabilities and your other post-employment liabilities are going to go up dramatically. So that aside, as far as the government-wide statements, I talk a little bit about your fund statements and where they ended 2018. Your general fund did end 2018 with about a $10.9 million aggregate fund balance, which actually was an increase of about $865,000 from fiscal 2017, even after transfers in and out. Your impact fee fund ended 2018 with about $2.3 million fund balance. That was actually down about $490,000, I think, primarily because I think there was a purchase of property by the city, and that those funds were used to make that purchase. I think it was actually around $490,000, $450,000. Your water fund did end 2018 with about $4.5 million in cash, and your wastewater fund ended 2018 with about $4.4 million in cash. The water fund did report a $944,000 increase in its net position, while your wastewater fund reported a $252,000 decline in its net position. So it's an area where you may want to take a look at the rate structure in your wastewater fund and make the assessment of whether or not there's a need to adjust those rates so you don't have a declining net position in the wastewater fund as you go forward. Your transit fund did operate at a $28,000 net increase in that position, and when it was all said and done, all of your business funds actually reported in 2018 a combined $1.2 million positive increase in its overall cash position. The rest of the report really has the notes to financial statements, accounting policies, some information on your cash and investments, which totaled about $25 million at the end of 2018, with most of that being invested in the State of California Local Agency Investment Fund. Then there's additional information on pensions and additional information on your other post-employment benefits as well. That pretty well completes my presentation on your financial statements on an overview basis. I have provided you with additional reports on my communication to those charged with government concerning the conduct of the actual financial statement audit itself and any required communications I'm obligated to make to you. I'd be happy to discuss any questions you may have at this point, if I can. Sure, you're welcome.
Any questions of staff for Terry?
You mentioned that there are certain things that can and can't go into the report, right?
Yes.
I was looking at the CalPERS retirement report for Solvang, and they've got a nice little graphic showing the funded status of our pension. Is there any way to put that into our reports going forward, or is there a reason why that's not can't be put in?
The Governmental Accounting Standard Board prescribes exactly and precisely what is to go in your financial statements and the format and the content. And you're not really allowed to depart from that. I mean, you can if you want to, but then you ought to be obligated to deal with this, whether or not to issue an unmodified opinion on your financial statements. Now, what is a possibility, there's that very last section of your financial statements where it's called other supplemental information, and the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, and you really have, let me step back from it, you really have two bodies you deal with in your financial reporting, one being the Governmental Accounting Standards Board and the other being the Governmental Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada, which is a very worthwhile organization to participate with and partner with. They're the ones who review your financial statements independent of my preparation and involvement in your financial statements, independent of the city. As I mentioned earlier, your financial statements being reviewed by maybe a finance director in Colorado, maybe one in Florida, who are absolutely impartial to the whole process. But what the GFOA suggests, which is the other partner, so to speak, in this whole process, is if in that very last section, it's called optional supplemental information, if you feel that there's some financial information that would be worthwhile presenting in a supplemental form, whatever form you may want, to demonstrate to your readers of your financial statements that you're in compliance with any sort of significant financial issue, then you're free to do so, whatever that may be. But outside of that particular section, I think the format's pretty well regulated by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, and the purpose is that to prevent just what you're suggesting, to City A coming up with one set of financial statements, City B coming up with another one, City C using a different format, and that's the whole purpose of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, is to prescribe uniform accounting and presentation standards for all governments in the United States. But there is that section back there in the optional information section that you might work with Sandra, and you might be able to develop something that would be what you're looking for.
So it would be basically like a footnote.
No, actually you could present a schedule. Okay. If it's financial information that you feel that's relevant to the city of Solvang and it's of significant interest, you're free to do so.
I understand. I went back for the last 10 years trying to appreciate the funded status of our pension system here in Solvang. And it was really difficult to get the information. It was really difficult to piece it together. And I appreciate the trouble you went through to try and do that. And here, for the first time, as of 2017, CalPERS actually produced a really nice little simple graphic, which would have been wonderful for everybody to see, whether it's a resident or somebody just looking at the CAF report.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll talk to you about that in terms of putting it in the supplemental going forward. In other words, we're not creating anything new. We're simply taking what the state has already produced and putting it into our report.
And if there's any question about it, just have Sandra open a dialogue with the government finance officers of the United States. Because, they see these documents from all cities throughout the United States and Canada. And I'm sure they're very receptive to unique circumstances that a city wants to communicate additional information.
It would be nice, for example, in 2008, our pension was fully funded, 100%. And today we're at 75%. And clearly there was the recession and the effect that
well, the funding of the pension doesn't, the funding of the pension, you're right, has to do with a little bit of the fact that the public employees retirement system in the state of California has not earned the rate of return that it envisioned it would earn. That's history. Everybody knows that, and that's why your pension obligations, as I understand, are going to go even higher into the future because of that. So I can understand why you might want to, provide some more detailed information in that supplemental section for your constituents, and that's a possibility.
Exactly, because we're going to have, unfortunately, at the end of the day, if CalPERS doesn't recover fully, then the taxpayers, the residents and the businesses are going to have to make
the irony to all of this is that, and Sandra can probably relate to this, I can't remember how many years ago, but there was a time here in the state of California where employers paid zero employer share of PERS costs, zero. And everybody was super funded because the PERS system had made so much money that they didn't need to charge cities for an employer contribution. Those days are history because what happened is not just Solvang, but all cities and governments in California spent that extra money that they would have been able to, if they had been able to take what they had been paying to PERS and put it in a safety net over the years, this whole pension funding thing wouldn't be an issue. But the reality is no government in California did that. So that's why now everybody's underfunded.
I'm sorry, Terry, I would have to disagree with you from the standpoint that CalPERS itself made some horrendous mistakes.
Well, I'm not going to deal with that, but all I know is from a fact about the rate of return not being significant enough to
And they made some additional promises in terms of benefits, which they couldn't keep, right?
I'm not going to say any, I can't speak on behalf of
But the bottom line is now the
CalPERS.
taxpayers have to pay for it. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, well,
And
there's
the
no
next-
question that.
And this leads me to the second point, which is, thank you for bringing up OPEB. It was left off last year, and now it's being reported fully.
Well, it wasn't left off last year because it wasn't required to be implemented last year.
Okay.
The accounting standard for other post-employment benefits was effective in this fiscal year, and the city of Solvang, like all other governments in California, implemented it in this fiscal year.
Right, so now we have an additional $1.9 million in
Yes.
unfunded liabilities that we have to address.
Yes.
Okay.
Could we have included that anyway? I mean, would they have allowed you to include that on last year's financial statement anyway?
If you wanted to early implement the standard, you could have done so.
Right, okay.
We could have put in the other, or the supplemental.
Right.
Which is why I brought that up. Now, the second part of that question is, the Santa Barbara Grand Jury met last year and issued a report in June suggesting that Santa Barbara pensions have problems. I mean, we're at moderate risk in terms of solvency and liquidity issues, right? But that didn't take into account OPEB. If we were to include the 1.9 million, how would that affect our risk assessment? Would we still remain in the moderate, or would we move higher? I mean, intuitively, we move higher, right?
I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at.
Well, I think a couple things. So that grand jury report only looked at pensions, and the criteria that they used to identify high, medium, low was very subjective in terms of what they decided was a high, medium, and low. So yes, you know, we do have a liability for OPEB. It's about $2 million at the end of June 2018. But when you look at our overall budget and what other kinds of costs we have, it's a very small percent. And we are putting money in the trust, and we are going to come back to you with a consultant to talk about other options. But that report really only looked at CalPERS. They were not looking at other post-employment benefits and not taking that into consideration.
I agree. But if we were to add the 1.9 or $2 million, intuitively that would increase our liability. And you're saying it doesn't have an adverse effect?
I suppose, sure, it's an additional liability for the city, and it's not new. We've had it all along. It's just that the reporting for it was required in 1718. I think that's what
So my
Terry was trying to
question
say.
is, are we moving from a moderate to a higher risk position because of that addition? In other words, the debt has been there all along. We just didn't address it.
Well, I think, again, that criteria is very subjective. I mean, we have to look at our particular city and what we've done to mitigate that risk versus what the grand jury decided your level as a percentage of payroll, for example, was moderate to high. As a city, we've done a lot to mitigate that risk. We've pretty much closed that option to current city employees that were hired after a certain date. We have nobody else who would come into this system now as a new hire would be eligible for those kind of benefits. So the pool of people getting those is very small and slowly closing. So I think we've done some things to really mitigate that risk where maybe other cities haven't. So again, I think it's somewhat subjective depending on what the criteria is versus looking at what has our city really done to mitigate that risk.
Well, I look forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just thank you for your service for such a long time and performing the audits and the decision to change auditors has nothing to do with your performance. I just felt that with the new council and everything, it was a need to have someone else come in and take a fresh look at it. So.
Well, I appreciate your kind comments. I've been auditing cities in California for about 35 years, and I understand the process, and I understand your decision to rotate out and have another firm provide the services. I want to say thank you to the city of Solvang for engaging me over the years to serve you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this topic in the audience? We're good, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Can we get a motion to accept the report into the record?
I motion that we go ahead and accept the report to the record.
I will second that motion.
And this is just an all in favor, say aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, at this time, can we take a 3-minute break? Right? Ready? 3-minute break. Okay, we're back in session. Moving on to that's item and Lisa put together. Moving on to item 9. Lisa, would you please read the title?
Item 9, 2018, financial highlights and mid-year budget adjustments. Presentation by Sandra Featherson, Administrative Services Director, and approval of mid-year budget adjustments.
Thank you. Staff report. Sandra?
Good evening again, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. Sandra Featherson. So tonight we're going to talk about where we are in the current year budget, fiscal year 18-19, and this is a report as of December 31st, 2018. And also we have mid-year budget adjustments that we're requesting based on looking at current trends of spending and upcoming projects and things that we know where we've requested additional funds. In the staff report, you'll see a graph of the general fund, and you'll see what is our current budget and where we are year to date with both revenues and expenditures. You can see we're pretty much right on track at about 49% for revenues and about 46% for expenditures. We adopted the general budget intending to use one-time reserves for items such as as I mentioned, the water meter replacement project and additional funding that came up during the budget hearing for the Solvang Chamber and other projects identified in our 10-year capital improvement plan. The other chart below shows a comparison at the same time year over year from the prior year and where we are in terms of over and under for spending. And first I'll do the revenues. So in terms of revenues, we're a little higher in our tax revenue than we were at this time last year. We're a little under our fees for services. We're not as high in our overhead contributions. So what that represents is a journal entry that the staff do because there is an overhead contribution that the enterprise fund makes, so the water, wastewater, and transit, and that is to cover. Because they're an enterprise fund, we have to allocate a portion of, like, for example, the city manager's time, my time that the general fund staff and the processes and the administrative things that we do that gets allocated to the different funds, the water, wastewater, and transit. And so that's a journal entry. And based on the timing, we didn't do that journal at the same time last year. I think we did it later in the year, which is why it shows that in 17-18, that amount of revenue is 0 versus the same time right now. We've already done that journal entry and we'll be more consistent going forward with doing that at the same time. And then looking at our 4 major revenue sources in the general fund, they account for about 90% of total general fund revenues. And the chart below that I've got in the staff report shows where we are from the current receipts through the second quarter and receipts versus the prior quarter. So TOT, we're a little higher than prior year at about 51%. Property tax, that's a little under from where we were in the prior year. That's based on when the county releases those property tax payments. Sales tax, 40.1%, and license permits and fees, we're at about 42%. So overall, on our major revenues, we're at about 45.4%. And then our other revenues, such as the franchise fees, the overhead contributions, et cetera, we're at about 84% that we've received. In terms of our expenditures, we've expended about 46.5% of what we were anticipating. I've got a chart there that shows by department. For example, council's at 51, almost 52%. The admin is a little less at 36.4%. Tourism is higher than normal at 66.9%. That's also due in part to a timing issue. So the Solvang Conference and Visitors Bureau, we've already made their third quarter payment to them in late December versus normally we might make it in early January. So it shows like 3/4 of their amount that they would get already being accounted for in the first half of the year.
Is there any reason that they're off?
You know, it's just kind of a timing issue of when they give the invoice to us and it turns on the check run. If we, if they tell us, we really need that as soon as possible, sometimes they have cash flow issues, so we try and accommodate them. So it's really based on their schedule and when they give the invoice to us.
So it's really not us.
No. We also have lower than anticipated expenses in the administration area due to less, pardon? We have fewer expenses in the admin department right now because we have not done the journal over to the water fund yet. So we'll typically wait and hold down to that money for cash flow purposes. And then at the end of the fiscal year, we'll put that money in the water fund reserves. In terms of the enterprise funds, water, wastewater, in terms of the revenues, we've received about 48% of the expected revenues, and that'll increase again once we do that transfer in of the $405,000. And in terms of budgeted expenses, a couple years ago, we made a transfer from the general fund to the water fund of about $800,000. So that's in a sense designated for this suspended Table A water that Matt mentioned earlier. We don't know if that purchase is going to happen in the current fiscal year. Doesn't sound like we're going to need to, but that was initially budgeted in 1819. So if we don't spend it, that money will stay in the water reserves. Another item in terms of revenue is we also budget, so the Sandy Kness Community Services District, which buys into the wastewater treatment plant, pays us a certain amount every year, and then we true up at the end of the year in terms of capital expenses. They pay approximately 20% of those expenses, and since we haven't done all of the work that we anticipated on the treatment plant, we have not billed them for those type of expenses. So when and if that project moves forward and we have incurred the capital expenses, we will bill them for that, but that's why that revenue is slightly less as well. I think that covers water and wastewater. So we have a list of budget adjustments that we'd like to make. We have some revenue adjustments. Basically all the funds, we're going to increase the interest income, water, wastewater, and general fund. We are getting better yields than we had anticipated in interest income. So we are budgeting a little bit more revenue in those departments. The donations, we got another unexpected donation for the HCA Park for the tennis courts. So we're going to increase that donation line item. And then in terms of expenditure adjustments, I included the cell phone allowance. This was approved as part of the negotiations with non-represented staff, and it was done after the budget was adopted last year. So I'm just including that. The total is $3,000. It's $50 basically a month per department head. So that was one of the adjustments. Another adjustment that was kind of we put in there was an increase in the supplies for the purchase of basically remodeling one of the workstations in the office. The HR specialist person sits basically right out in the open. We don't really have any private area for that person, and so this was to afford a little more privacy in terms of dealing with employee issues and payroll and things like that. So we're going to be doing a remodel there. I won't go over every particular expenditure adjustment, but I'm happy to answer questions on any particular one if you have them.
Do any one of them jump out as like a big chunk or a big change?
Well, in the water fund, I think it's important to note that we are increasing purchased water because we had to utilize the water from ID1 during November and December because of the shutdown. And so that budget's increasing pretty significantly, the amount for purchased water. They've also had additional costs to the SCADA system. That's their system that runs the water wells and the distribution, and they have to do programming on that, and they're doing additional programming that for the new well to come online, and then whatever other modifications they need to ensure everything's running properly. So those costs are a little bit higher than expected as well. We are reducing some costs, so we don't just increase expenses, but we reduce where we feel we can. For example, the Mission Drive Improvement Project was completed under budget, so reducing that amount. We are reducing the budget for the Slurry Seal Pavement Project under the Measure A fund because that was also completed under budget. We are also reducing expenses in wastewater for the Bank Restoration Maintenance Project due to lower costs. And so there are areas where we are reducing some expenses as well. And then I have a summary on the back that kind of shows you attachment A, which shows you the revenue increases and the expenditure increases and decreases for the general fund. And then page 2 of that goes by fund and shows you the increases and decreases that we are incurring.
So in reality, the revenue increases, we really don't have any except for interest income because donation is not something we're going to be spending. That goes to tennis courts.
Correct. And it's one time. You know, it's not really, I mean, these are all basically one-time things, but correct. It's just the interest income that we're really increasing in the revenue. The other ones, you know, our property tax, sales tax, those are all pretty consistent with where we would expect them to be, so I don't anticipate a need to increase that revenue. Now, third quarter, when we've seen a little bit more of the TOT, we might come back and say, based on TOT revenue so far, we might increase that. Or sales tax. We're having a great sales tax because of the holidays and, spring and the Taste of Solvang. We might come back and say, let's increase that revenue. But right now, we don't anticipate doing that.
Does anyone know the plan for, I just saw the increase for the commissioner training. Is there a reason they asked for the increase there?
Well, that was because we were anticipating 2 new planning commissioners, I think. And so they were going to send them. So we built that into the budget where it wasn't initially.
Good. Are you finished the presentation?
I am, and that concludes my staff report.
Thank you. Staff, questions for Santa? Well, I know we've been asking as we've been going. Any other questions for her?
Yeah, the only thing I would the only thing I would say is it's very informative, all this information. I just found it super hard to actually look at it and get through it in the time that we had. And I know you guys are putting this together as soon as possible. But it was just like, I just ran through this and I'm going, I would really like to spend a little bit more time on this, looking at some of these adjustments and just getting into it more. And I understand you guys are just, you're pushing it to the limit. That was my only comment, was I don't feel as informed as I would like to feel on all of this going forward. I don't know how that can be remedied or if it can be helped or anything, or maybe I just need to go in more often.
Well, one thought, in the past, in previous years, we had really only come to council with big adjustments one time in the middle of the year. But going forward, we're going to try and do this quarterly, so that might ease some of the burden in terms of the volume of adjustments that we'd be doing at one time. And we might, the staff report wouldn't look quite as big because we'll be able to, kind of give it to you on a quarterly basis more frequently, maybe less activity than quarter to quarter. So that could be one option. We could try it that way and see if that works better.
I would strongly agree with that idea. In other words, the more information, I think the better it is for us. At least I'm a financial guy like you, and I love to see numbers and how we're tracking. If we can get quarterly reports and then show how we're doing, not just during the year, but year over year. How do we compare it to last year, right? That would be very helpful.
And I think David is going to be one of the resources that the new city manager, he may have some ideas that we're not thinking about. I just thought of that could help us with this as well, hopefully.
Well, I know Buellton does, it's on their website. You can get monthly and quarterly reports. I'm not sure why we can't do that, but we'll address that, I guess, another time.
Rick, do you have a comment?
I would just say that, one, in my estimation, you do have a very limited staff. And so to do monthly reports is challenging. I think quarterly reports make the most sense. That's what I've seen in industry-wide. I did work with your finance director on trying to put this together, and the intent is like what she said. If we do this on a quarterly basis, you'll get used to the format, and then it won't be as long. So it'll be a lot shorter. And the intent is not to get you as many budget amendments to look at in the future from that perspective.
Well, this is certainly a big improvement over last year. I appreciate that.
But also, any questions that we all have can be directed to the city manager, to Sandra, about specific questions. I know we all sat with you as an orientation, but I don't know why we couldn't possibly, if we have questions, or especially, Daniel, you being an accountant, if you guys could sit down and someday just have a coffee and go over stuff for an hour.
And the intent is to compare it to the last year at this time.
Yes.
So you
year
have
over
a
year.
basis of comparison.
That's really important for me. Like I look at financial stuff all day long, every day, and it's just a common presentation, right? When you look at businesses and things like that. So it'd be really helpful if we could do that. And I'd like to know why Buellton is able to get this done. I think they outsource some of this stuff. Maybe that's why they do it. Maybe you can find that out.
Yeah, I could talk to the city manager. I'll be seeing him later this week.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have limited staff, and I'd like to know how we can improve this.
Well, I look at kind of different items that jump out at me. For example, right now I'm looking at weed abatement and hiring the goats for 16 acres for 15 grand.
I love goats.
But I'm just wondering if
Yeah, they're delicious.
the things that I wonder about is, did we decide to do this goat program because it was a politically correct thing to do rather than just get out there and whack the weeds down? I mean, so these are just kind of expenses that I look at that I want to know where they came from, how long this has been going on, and why.
I can give you a little history on the weed goat abatement. I believe in prior years, Fred used to get a crew from the California Conservation Corps to come out and do the weed abatement. And I think they have not been available, but I can follow up with Fred on that. And then they brought in the goats last year, and they were very successful in terms of eradicating all the poison oak at the park.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that's why the decision was made to go with them again, because it was very successful down there. But I can certainly follow up with him and get back to you on the specifics.
I'm just curious to see what other options we would have for weed abatement and getting rid of poison oak rather than goats.
I think it's a great idea. If you can use goats, go for it.
Well, I don't, there might
shepherd
be
in town
something
somewhere.
less expensive and, environmentally okay. I mean, this is what I'm trying to, and then another, just another little nitty gritty item I'm looking at. We were talking about the HR, having office furniture for the HR individual, so which I understand, so they don't sit in the middle of the room. So you're talking about putting a cubicle around this person or putting a whole office in, because that was a $7,000 item.
Well, we've looked at a couple different options. I'm not sure if you've been over to this space, but where there's an open area where there's 4 very low workstations, and to replace all of those with high wall workstations was going to be even more expensive. Where the person sits now is right outside Rick's office and my office, which is really convenient because I'm working on HR stuff probably 80% of the time. And so for her to be dealing with HR issues, it's like a low counter. So she really has no privacy whatsoever. So we've looked at several different options, and the best one we can come up with, we worked with Staples, is to build some higher walls, but it's all panel-based, so you can't just replace the walls. You have to go with the work surface. Right, basically. So we have to redo the work surface, and we anticipate it to be between $5,000 and $7,000 to do that.
Do we have a problem with office space?
We do not, but we do have an issue with the privacy factor. You know, she's dealing with payroll, benefits, calling benefit companies on the phone and things like that.
I'm not disagreeing with that idea. I'm just wondering how she ended up in the middle of the floor, the offices. If her function is that important in terms of privacy, why doesn't she have her own little office?
There is no other private offices in the space over there, and so.
So we do have an office problem then.
Well, I think we're able to make do. I think this is a short-term but long-term good solution for that position, is to have a workstation with higher walls and privacy glass that would allow for some privacy for an employee to sit with that person and discuss any issues, as well as we've looked at other space. I mean, I think we have the space for the amount of people that we have. But if council wanted to invest much more money, we could be more creative and certainly create other offices and do something different. But I was trying to kind of go with the least cost, expensive alternative to try and accomplish what we need.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
Anybody in the audience like to discuss this matter?
Are you still awake?
Nancy, you're a trooper, thank you. Yes. And thank you for your kind words, by the way. Can I get a motion to approve the budget adjustments?
I'd like to move that we approve the budget adjustments.
Okay. Second?
I'll second that.
Having heard a motion to second, any further council discussion? If not, Lisa, will you take a roll call vote?
Councilmember Dearness?
Yes.
Waite?
Yes.
Clark?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, moving on to council member reports. Do we have any?
Yes.
All right, Ken, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll make it as quickly as I can. Had a meeting with the SBCAG, Santa Barbara County Agency of Governments. We covered issues regarding Measure A. We spoke about the need for continued contract with the Highway Patrol for Highway 166 because it's so dangerous. one interesting thing that came up was when they do the census, they're going to be doing it online. So you're no longer going to get something in the mail to fill out for census. So I find this to be, yes, and I said that in the meeting. I think we're going to see a significant undercount of individuals, and specifically of seniors and individuals that are not computer savvy. So what they've decided to do then is throw out $30 million towards nonprofit groups to go around and help people fill out their census. Okay, so that was something that I questioned, just because it's the census will just not be accurate. It won't be accurate if we do this online. No. Right after that, we had a LAFCO meeting that I attended, and they had to appoint their city representatives for LAFCO, and I really wanted to make sure that we would have some say in this. Jim Richardson was the main rep for the city. He is no longer our mayor. South County was pushing to have 2 individuals from the South County, Santa Barbara area on LAFCO to represent the cities. I disagree with that, and so we have the mayor of Buellton as the alternate, which I think is great because we may have some issues that we might have to deal with together. And then their main LAFCO rep is the mayor of Glida. Let's see, what else? I met with the Eastern Management Agency for the Groundwater Sustainability, and we decided that we were not going to be board members, but we are committee members. So we changed that around. So it's more of a committee situation. And that is it for my committee reports.
Thank you, Karen. Chris, anything to report?
Yes. Ryan and I met with the San Ynez Community Services District. I guess the previous meeting occurred 2 years previous to that, something like that. So it was sort of like a get-to-know-you meeting, and to reestablish communications and priorities. And the primary issue that they wanted to address was the capacity that they were using at our plant, because I believe they pay for 21% of our plant, and their concern was as we move forward in terms of the choosing and building the new plant, what's their cost going to be? Because they are a much smaller agency, and the difference between a $10 million plant and a $15 million plant is pretty significant to them. So it was a really good meeting, and I think it was important for Matt to meet with his counterpart over there and to reestablish communication and address this really important issue for them.
Question regarding that. Has there been any discussion about possibly combining as far as the entire valley into one wastewater treatment plant and having ID1 take over all of the water responsibility?
Yes, there was a discussion probably about 4 years ago when I was on that board, and
Mike.
And ID1, which a lot of residents didn't realize, they are licensed to do treatment,
okay,
as well as distribution. And they were willing to enter into negotiations and take this on. And we went through several meetings with Los Olivos, CSD, and neither agency was interested at that point in having ID1 do this. I believe what was happening in Los Olivos was they wanted to have full control of their area.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to become their own entity. Also, a lot of it had to do with the general plan, and I believe in one of the original general plan, there was a stipulation that you could not run wastewater through an agricultural area, so we couldn't bring it down the Alamo Pintado corridor. Yes. So I don't know where that stands now, but I think it should be brought back. I think it should be brought up. I mean, I would support that. They have the knowledge. They have the knowledge and the ability
I just,
and the government relations to handle stuff like this.
So I just want for the record to note that the three of you all support that idea.
Sure. I mean, as far as I can see, I think we'd have a lot more power if we united to be able to. I think so. To be able to get more things done in this area, and who knows? I mean, if we could combine the valley, you could also pull in Buellton, you could pull in Lompoc, and have a one large water district, and you're going to have a lot more power to deal with the state, to deal with Santa Barbara, to deal with all of that. You know, I don't know. Through getting to know the water situation, that was the first thing that came to my mind was, why are we fighting each other and constantly negotiating with each other when we can?
Ironically enough, that was one of the things that we discussed, is why had there been so much disagreement between the two groups, and we were there to overcome that, and we did successfully. We definitely, I know that I campaign on the idea of an integrated system, you know, valley-wide system, and it certainly, I'm happy and thrilled to hear that the rest of you guys support that idea, so that the next time we meet with them, I can go ahead and let them know that that's something we're in favor of.
Excuse me, for a clarification, are you talking wastewater or are you talking water?
Wastewater.
Both. Both.
I'm referring to both. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been an advocate for both for years.
Well,
Wastewater and
I can
water.
only speak for the poop.
In 3 minutes, we need to take a vote to make this meeting go any longer.
Let's take the vote.
Well, we can continue this conversation
Yes. That was my question.
Any other? Well, the only thing I have is a library committee. There's some great things coming up this next month. The library, on the 15th, March 13th, there's a great speaker, Arthur George. I saw him do the mythology of Halloween, and it was really fascinating. He's doing the mythology of wine at Carr Winery on the 13th from 5:30 to 7. It's actually very fascinating, and he's an interesting author. So the library has got a lot of neat stuff going on, but we have not had a meeting per se. That's the last as far as the committee goes. Do we have any updates from any council members? Anything else? That concludes tonight's meeting. Good night. Council adjourned.